Inside Folsom Prison, rules of the yard, life in America's most dangerous. The gates of Folsom State Prison have been closing behind men since 1880. For more than a century, the sound of steel doors slamming shut here has meant one thing: the outside world is gone. Inside these walls, the rules are different. Violence can erupt in seconds. Alliances form along invisible lines. And survival often depends on understanding a code that was never written down, but everyone is expected to follow. Some men arrive believing prison is simply about serving time. They learn quickly that at Folsom, time is the least dangerous thing inside these walls. Because the real question is not how long you're staying. It's whether you can survive the yard. And what happens next inside Folsom's prison yard is something most people never imagine. The prison built for control. Folsom State Prison sits along the American River, about 25 miles northeast of Sacramento. When it opened in 1880, it was designed to be one of the most secure prisons in the United States. Massive granite walls. Guard towers on every corner. A design meant to control men considered too dangerous for normal incarceration. But the prison quickly gained another reputation. Folsom wasn't just secure. It was violent. Over the decades, riots, stabbings, gang wars, and escape attempts became part of the prison's long history. The public would later hear about Folsom through music, most famously when Johnny Cash performed inside its walls in 1968. But that concert revealed only a glimpse of life here. Behind the applause and headlines was a prison where power structures were constantly shifting, and where a single mistake could cost a man his life. Because inside Folsom, control doesn't belong only to the guards. Much of it belongs to the inmates themselves. Entering the machine. Every man entering Folsom passes through a process designed to strip away identity. Clothes are taken. Hair is cut. Personal belongings are cataloged and removed. The prison calls this intake. For the inmate, it's the moment reality settles in. The first nights are often spent in reception units, temporary housing where new arrivals are evaluated. But something else is happening during those early days. Other inmates are watching. They want to know one thing. Who are you? Because inside Folsom, your crime matters. Your background matters. Your affiliations matter. And if you don't belong anywhere, you may quickly become a target. But the deeper rules of the yard won't reveal themselves immediately. Those rules are learned through observation. And sometimes, through violence. The yard. At certain times of the day, the cell doors open. Inmates move toward the prison yard. To someone unfamiliar with prison life, the yard might appear chaotic. Men walking in circles. Others lifting weights. Some sitting silently at concrete tables. But to those inside, the yard is one of the most organized environments in the prison. Every section belongs to someone. Every bench. Every workout area. Every table. These territories aren't marked by signs. They're defined by race, gang affiliation, and long-standing prison politics. A new inmate entering the yard without understanding these boundaries is making a dangerous mistake. Because the yard operates under a code known simply as the politics. And breaking those politics can lead to consequences that are immediate and brutal. But the real structure of the yard goes even deeper. And it begins with the gangs. The power structure. Over the years, prison gangs have become one of the most powerful forces inside Folsom. Groups like the Aryan Brotherhood, the Mexican Mafia, the Nuestra Familia, and black prison gangs developed structures that mirror organized crime. Each gang has leadership. Each has soldiers. And each has rules. Inside prison, these organizations control everything from protection to drug distribution. They enforce discipline within their own ranks. And when conflicts arise between groups, violence often follows. But gang power isn't only about aggression. It's also about order. In many ways, gangs maintain a form of stability in environments where chaos could easily take over. Because without structure, the yard would become uncontrollable. But that structure comes at a cost. If a gang member breaks the rules, punishment can be severe. Sometimes even deadly. And those punishments rarely happen where guards can see them. The silent rules. Inside Folsom, the most important rules are never written down. They are passed from inmate to inmate. Violating them can destroy a person's reputation, or worse. One of the most important rules is simple. Mind your business. In prison, asking questions about someone else's situation can be dangerous. Another rule involves respect. A small act of disrespect, cutting in line, touching another inmate's property, staring too long, can escalate quickly. Then there's the rule about cooperation with authorities. In prison culture, informing on other inmates carries a heavy stigma. Those labeled as informants often face isolation or retaliation. But perhaps the most important rule of all is understanding where you stand. Every inmate occupies a place within the social hierarchy of the prison. And attempting to move beyond that place without permission can create conflict. What happens to those who break these rules is something few inmates want to experience. Because punishment inside prison doesn't always come from the guards. Sometimes it comes from the yard itself. Violence. Despite layers of security, violence inside Folsom is never far away. Improvised weapons, known as shanks, can be made from almost anything. Pieces of metal, broken plastic, sharpened toothbrushes. Many of these weapons are hidden carefully inside cells or secret compartments. Because when conflicts erupt, they move fast. A fight might begin over a debt, a gang dispute, or a perceived insult. Within seconds, dozens of inmates can become involved. Correctional officers respond quickly, but the violence is often over before they arrive. And when it ends, the consequences ripple across the prison. Entire yards may be locked down. Searches begin. Cells are torn apart looking for weapons. But the most difficult part for prison officials is that violence rarely comes with warning. Because many attacks are planned in silence. And sometimes the reasons behind them stretch back years. But violence inside Folsom isn't only about survival. It's also about reputation. Reputation. In prison, reputation can determine everything. A man who appears weak may attract pressure from others. But someone known for responding aggressively may be left alone. For that reason, some inmates feel forced to react quickly when challenged. Walking away from a confrontation can sometimes be interpreted as weakness. But responding violently can lead to years of additional prison time. It's a constant calculation. One wrong decision can change a sentence forever. And many inmates live with that tension every day. Because the yard is always watching. Every movement. Every reaction. Every conflict. But there's another side to prison life that outsiders rarely see. The long stretches of time where nothing happens at all. And strangely, those moments can be the hardest. The endless routine. Life inside Folsom is defined by routine. The day begins early. Correctional officers perform counts to ensure every inmate is present. Breakfast follows. Then work assignments or programs begin. Some inmates work in prison industries. Others attend educational classes. Many simply wait for the next yard time. The structure is meant to create order. But over years, sometimes decades, the repetition becomes overwhelming. Days blend together. Weeks pass without meaningful change. For inmates serving long sentences, time itself can become a psychological burden. Some develop routines to cope. Exercise, reading, studying. Others withdraw into isolation. And for a few, the pressure eventually leads to something darker. Because prison is not only a physical environment. It's also a mental one. And the mind can become its own kind of prison. But there's another part of Folsom that many inmates fear even more than the yard. A place where the rules are completely different. The hole. Inside Folsom, solitary confinement is known simply as the hole. And what happens behind those steel doors is something many inmates try desperately to avoid. But that story is only beginning. What life is really like inside solitary confinement at Folsom, and why some inmates never return to the yard, is something few people truly understand. And it reveals a side of prison life far darker than anything seen on the yard. Solitary confinement inside Folsom is not simply another housing unit. It is a different world. A place where time slows down, sound disappears, and human contact becomes rare. In prison language, it is called the hole. Officially, it is the security housing unit, or administrative segregation. But inmates use simpler words. The hole. Because once the door closes behind you, it can feel like you've fallen into a place where the outside world no longer exists. And the reason someone ends up here can vary. Sometimes it's punishment. Sometimes it's protection. But no matter why a man enters the hole, life inside quickly becomes a psychological battle. The walk to the hole. The journey usually begins after an incident. A fight on the yard. Possession of a weapon. A gang-related investigation. Or simply being accused of violating prison rules. Officers arrive. Hands are cuffed behind the back. Leg irons are secured. Then comes the walk. Inmates moving through these corridors often know what waits at the end. A small concrete cell. Limited contact with other people. And sometimes, weeks, months, or even years in isolation. The sound of those chains scraping against concrete becomes something many inmates never forget. Because each step toward the hole means leaving behind the one thing prisoners value most. Movement. Freedom, even in its smallest form. Inside the cell. A typical solitary cell at Folsom is stark. Concrete walls. A narrow bunk attached to the floor. A small steel toilet and sink. A slot in the door where meals are passed through. The door itself is solid steel. No bars. Only a small window and a narrow opening for handcuffs. Inmates in these cells may spend 22 to 24 hours a day alone. Exercise, when allowed, often takes place in another small concrete enclosure, sometimes referred to as a dog run. A cage barely larger than the cell itself. Human contact is minimal. Conversations between cells happen through walls, by shouting through vents, or tapping coded messages against pipes. Days become quiet, then strangely loud. Because in isolation, even the smallest sounds echo endlessly. Footsteps, doors closing, distant shouting. And sometimes, the silence becomes the hardest thing to endure. But what many people don't realize is that solitary confinement isn't only about punishment. It's also a tool prison officials use to control the yard, breaking the chain of violence. When gang conflicts erupt, prison administrators sometimes isolate specific inmates believed to be leaders. Removing these individuals can slow or stop violence before it spreads. But identifying those leaders isn't always easy. Many gang orders travel quietly. Through letters. Through coded messages. Through conversations that appear harmless to outsiders. Because prison gangs have developed ways to communicate without drawing attention. And when investigators believe someone is directing violence, solitary confinement becomes one of the only tools available. But the consequences of long-term isolation are complicated. Some inmates emerge from the hole quieter, more withdrawn. Others come back to the yard with something different. Anger. And sometimes that anger ignites conflicts that had been waiting beneath the surface. Because the yard never forgets. Old disputes can remain unresolved for years. Waiting. Watching. Until the right moment arrives. The economics of prison. Despite strict regulations, an economy exists inside Folsom. Money itself is rarely exchanged directly. Instead, items become currency. Instant noodles. Coffee packets. Tuna. Postage stamps. These small objects carry surprising value. An inmate who works in the kitchen may have access to extra food. Someone with family support might receive money for the prison commissary. Others trade services. Haircuts. Laundry. Artwork. Writing letters. But just like any economy, debts exist. And unpaid debts inside prison can lead to serious consequences. A simple loan of ramen noodles might seem trivial. But if repayment doesn't happen, tensions can build. Because inside prison, trust is one of the few things inmates truly rely on. And breaking that trust can damage a person standing on the yard. But sometimes the stakes become much higher than food or coffee. Because contraband also moves through prisons. And that trade creates another layer of danger. Contraband. Contraband has always been part of prison life. Cell phones. Drugs. Weapons. These items often enter through creative, and sometimes shocking, methods. Visitors. Corrupt staff. Drone drops over prison walls. Packages hidden in legal mail. Once inside, contraband becomes incredibly valuable. A single cell phone can connect inmates with the outside world. It can also allow gang leaders to continue directing criminal activity beyond prison walls. For that reason, correctional officers conduct frequent searches. Cells are dismantled. Mattresses sliced open. Personal property scattered across floors. But even the most aggressive searches rarely eliminate contraband completely. Because prison environments evolve. And inmates adapt quickly. But while contraband creates risk, it's another element of prison life that often leads to the most tension. Power. Who really runs the yard? Officially, correctional officers control Folsom. Armed towers overlook every movement. Security cameras monitor hallways. Counts occur multiple times each day. But the reality inside many prisons is more complicated. Inmates themselves influence much of what happens on the yard. Gang leaders enforce discipline within their groups. Conflicts between different groups are often negotiated internally before they reach the level of open violence. In some situations, inmates even intervene to prevent chaos. Because widespread violence brings consequences that affect everyone. Extended lockdowns. Lost privileges. Weeks confined inside cells. For that reason, many prisoners prefer stability. But stability inside prison is fragile. And sometimes it only takes one incident to shatter it. When serious violence occurs inside Folsom, the prison can enter lockdown. During lockdown, movement stops. Inmates remain inside their cells. Meals are delivered through food slots. Programs are canceled. The yard sits empty. Sometimes these lockdowns last days. Other times, weeks. Investigations unfold. Weapons are searched for. Suspects are removed. For inmates, lockdown can feel suffocating. The small freedoms of prison life, walking outside, exercising, interacting with others, suddenly disappear. And tensions inside the cell blocks begin to rise. Because confinement inside confinement creates pressure. And pressure, inside prison, can eventually explode. But not every story inside Folsom is defined by violence. Some inmates attempt to build something different during their time inside. And what they pursue might surprise many people. Searching for change. Over the years, Folsom has developed programs intended to reduce violence and help inmates prepare for life beyond prison. Education programs allow prisoners to earn high school diplomas. Some pursue college-level coursework. Others participate in vocational training, learning trades such as carpentry, welding, or electrical work. For long-term inmates, these programs can create purpose. Something to focus on beyond the routines of prison life. But participation is not always easy. Gang politics can sometimes discourage involvement. Because education often requires crossing social boundaries that exist on the yard. Still, many inmates choose to take the risk. Because for those hoping to leave prison someday, preparation matters. But the reality is that some men inside Folsom will never walk free again. And that knowledge changes how they see the world. Life sentences. Folsom houses many inmates serving life sentences. Some will spend decades behind these walls. Others know they will die here. For these men, time carries a different meaning. The early years may be filled with anger or regret. But as decades pass, perspectives sometimes shift. Older inmates often become quieter, more reflective. Some mentor younger prisoners. Others withdraw completely. Because living with the knowledge that freedom will never return forces a person to confront difficult questions. About choices. About responsibility. About redemption. But even among those serving life sentences, hope can appear in unexpected ways. Through family visits. Through letters. Through moments of connection that remind inmates the outside world still exists. And those moments can become powerful reminders of what was lost. But perhaps the most important question surrounding prisons like Folsom remains unanswered. Does incarceration truly change people? Or does it simply contain them? The world beyond the walls. For the communities outside, Folsom represents safety. A place where individuals who committed serious crimes are kept away from society. For the men inside, it represents consequence. A place where time slows down and choices from the past continue to shape the future. Over the decades, thousands of inmates have passed through these gates. Some entered as young men and left decades later as strangers to the world they once knew. Others never left at all. And inside the prison yard, the same rules continue to operate. Respect. Reputation. Survival. The code of the yard remains largely unchanged. But what many people don't realize is that the most difficult part of prison often begins after the gates open. Because for inmates who eventually leave Folsom, the outside world can feel just as unfamiliar as the prison itself. And that final transition, from inmate to free citizen, is a journey filled with challenges few truly understand. But that story may be the most important one of all. Inside Folsom Prison, the walls are built from stone and steel. But the real structure holding this place together is something far less visible: rules, reputations, and a code that every inmate learns quickly or suffers the consequences. For more than a century, men have entered these gates carrying the weight of their past. Some leave changed. Some leave broken. And some never leave at all. What happens inside places like Folsom raises difficult questions about punishment, survival, and whether a system built on control can truly create redemption. Because behind every prison wall is a story most of the world never sees. And sometimes, the most dangerous battles are the ones fought long after the cell door closes.